I'd always thought of myself as a level-headed guy. I wasn't the kind to jump to conclusions, and I never let jealousy get the best of me. But sitting in my car outside our house that night, I found my mind racing, piecing together every small, barely noticeable change in Sarah. Each time she smiled at her phone, every vague excuse she gave for late work meetings, all those moments where she seemed lost in thought, all suddenly seemed like red flags I'd just overlooked. Sarah was the woman I'd built my whole life around. She was supposed to be the one who knew me inside and out, just like I thought I knew her. Or so I believed. It was these little things, the way she suddenly became so guarded about her phone, the faint scent of a new perfume I never recognized, the way her eyes would drift off while I was talking, that had started eating away at me. So there I was, sitting in front of our own home, waiting for her to get back from yet another late meeting, with questions circling in my mind that I didn't really want answered. I hadn't planned on following her or letting it get to this point, but the uncertainty was getting too heavy to carry. The evening air was cool, and as I sat there, I watched the porch light flicker on and off. A strange feeling of dread settled in my chest. When she finally pulled into the driveway, I watched closely as she stepped out of her car. She looked around, almost like she was checking her surroundings, and I quickly slid down in my seat, hoping she hadn't spotted me. There was a lightness about her, a kind of energy I hadn't seen in a long time. She didn't go straight inside, though. She lingered on the porch, scrolling through her phone with this small, private smile on her face. My heart sank as I recognized that smile. It was the same look she used to give me back when we'd first started dating, when everything between us was fresh and exciting. And now, she was wearing that look, for someone else. The moment passed quickly. She slipped her phone into her bag and headed inside. I sat there in my car, trying to make sense of it all, feeling a slow, creeping weight settle over me, one that left me feeling hollow. After a while, I finally started the engine and drove off, my mind whirling with the realization that I couldn't just ignore this anymore. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to the things I used to overlook or brush off. She'd started getting up earlier, dressing with extra care even for casual outings. I noticed a couple of missed calls from unknown numbers on our home phone, though she dismissed them, saying they were just telemarketers. Normally, I'd have believed her without a second thought, but now, with doubt firmly lodged in my mind, every little thing seemed like part of some hidden puzzle. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, I decided to test her reaction. Casually, I mentioned, "Hey, I was thinking of swinging by your office tomorrow. Maybe we could grab lunch together?" For just a split second, she froze, her makeup brush hovering mid-swipe. It was only a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "Tomorrow's packed with meetings. We probably won't even have time for coffee." She shrugged, turning back to her mirror. "But thanks for the offer." I watched her, my heart pounding as I noticed a new tension in her shoulders, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. She was hiding something. I knew it. The next day, unable to shake the feeling, I decided to stop by her office anyway. If she was there, she'd be surprised, maybe even happy. And if she wasn't, well, I wasn't sure what I'd do. I strolled into the lobby and walked up to the receptionist with my best friendly smile. "Hey there. I was just wondering if Sarah was free. Thought I'd surprise her for lunch," I said. The receptionist, a young woman with bright eyes, looked at me with a bit of confusion. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but Sarah isn't in the office today. She's working off-site, I think." A cold wave ran through me. I forced a smile, thanked her, and walked out, my mind spinning. So she wasn't at work. She'd lied about her schedule. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to keep calm while anger and hurt churned inside me. That evening, I decided it was time to confront her. She walked in, looking cheerful, her cheeks slightly flushed, which only made my stomach turn. "Hey," I greeted her, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "How was work?" "Oh, busy as always," she replied, slipping off her jacket. "Barely had a moment to breathe." I paused, watching her closely. "Funny," I said. I stopped by your office today. Her face lost color, and she froze, her eyes dropping to the floor. I was actually off-site, you know, for meetings, right? I kept my tone calm. But they said you were off-site all day. You didn't mention that. She hesitated, and I could see her mind racing to come up with something. It was a last-minute thing, just one of those, she mumbled, her voice trailing off. The look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. The tension between us thickened, leaving me feeling colder than I'd ever felt before. The room filled with a thick silence, both of us swallowed up by all the things we weren't saying. I took a step back, feeling the weight of the truth settle heavily over me. I don't know what's going on, Sarah, I said quietly, my voice low and steady. But I think it's time you were honest with me. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then she shook her head, forcing a weak smile. Mike, you're overthinking this, she replied lightly. It's just work, nothing to worry about. Her words felt hollow, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me, and I could feel the space between us growing, like a widening gap that neither of us knew how to bridge. That night, she went to bed early, leaving me alone in the quiet of our house. I sat there, wondering how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let things get this far without noticing. The next day, determined to find answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called Jack, my closest friend, and confided everything in him. He listened without interrupting, his voice calm and steady when he finally spoke. Mike, I know this is tough, but maybe it's time to dig a little deeper. If she's hiding something, you deserve to know. I nodded, feeling a new sense of resolve. I couldn't just stand by and let my world crumble without doing something about it. That evening, I waited until Sarah was asleep before reaching for her phone on the bedside table. I scrolled through her messages and call history, but everything looked perfectly normal, almost too clean. Frustrated, I was about to give up when I noticed an unfamiliar messaging app I'd never seen her use before. My heart raced as I opened it and scrolled through the conversations. There, buried among casual chats, was a thread that made my stomach drop. She'd been messaging someone named Nick, with messages full of laughter, heart emojis, and words that cut me to the core. I put the phone down, my mind reeling. There it was, the truth staring me in the face, undeniable and painful. This wasn't just a nagging suspicion anymore, it was real. And in that moment, I knew that the life I'd believed in and the woman I'd loved had been hiding a side of herself I'd never known. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I'd wanted the truth, and now I had it. But now, the real question was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning felt different. The house still smelled the same, and our routine hadn't changed, but the weight of her betrayal was everywhere I looked, in every corner of every room. I forced myself to act normal, to keep playing along, because I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to know more, to find out just how deep this deception went. Sarah moved through her morning routine like nothing was wrong, giving me a quick kiss goodbye, a gesture that suddenly felt empty, before heading off to work. As soon as I heard her car pull away, I picked up my phone and called Jack. He answered right away, his voice calm and reassuring. I found something, I said, keeping my voice low even though the house was empty. She's been messaging a guy named Nick. There was a pause before Jack replied, his tone steady but serious. Do you want me to help figure out who he is? He asked. Yes, I said firmly, my mind racing. I need to know who this guy is, where he works, everything. Jack agreed, promising to do some digging, and I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Whatever secrets Sarah was keeping, I was one step closer to the truth. Later that day, Jack called back with news. I found something, he said, sounding hesitant. I don't know if you're ready for this, but Nick isn't just some random guy. He's someone from your past. A cold chill settled over me as I tried to process what he just said. What do you mean? I asked slowly. He's the same Nick you knew back in college. Remember him? He's the guy Sarah dated before you two got together. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and suddenly memories came flooding back. Scenes from those college days, when I'd first met Sarah. She'd been dating Nick back then, a smooth-talking, distant guy who always seemed to have his own plans. They'd broken up, and not long after, she and I started dating. I'd assumed she'd moved on from him, that he was just part of her past. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Positive, Jack replied. He's even working in the same field as her now. It looks like they reconnected recently. The pieces were coming together, but what they revealed was darker than anything I'd imagined. This man she'd been messaging wasn't some random fling. He was someone she'd once loved, a piece of her life before I was ever in the picture. What are you going to do? Jack asked, his voice cautious. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settling on me. I need to see them together, I said finally. If Sarah was lying to me, I wanted to catch her in the act. The following day, I put my plan into motion. She mentioned that she'd be working late again, and I pretended to believe her, nodding the way I always had to show support. She smiled back, thanking me for understanding, but I caught a flicker in her eyes, a mix of guilt and relief, as if my acceptance made her lies easier to tell. As soon as she left, I waited a few minutes before heading out myself. Jack had already told me where Nick worked, so I drove over and parked across the street, watching the entrance. I wasn't sure what I expected, but when I saw Sarah arrive just a few minutes later, her face lighting up as she walked in, my heart twisted in ways I couldn't put into words. I sat there, waiting in the cold silence of my car as the minutes dragged on, my mind swirling with images of them together. The pain was a slow burn, but just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, they finally emerged. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they strolled down the street, oblivious to the world around them. The sight was unbearable, a sharp, raw ache that made me feel hollow inside. I wanted to march over and confront them, let them see the hurt I was feeling, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I acted now, she'd only try to deny it, twist the truth into something she could manipulate. No, I needed to do this differently. That night, after she was asleep, I gathered her laptop and phone and took them to the living room where I could work undisturbed. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but at that point I didn't care. I needed answers. I started with her laptop, combing through files, emails, anything that might reveal the truth behind her lies. And then, in a hidden folder, I found it, old messages between her and Nick, going back months. They talked about memories from college, moments they'd shared, regrets and unresolved feelings she'd apparently never let go of. But it wasn't just messages. There were recent photos too, showing them together at places I didn't recognize. A coffee shop, a park, even a beach, all places she told me she was visiting with friends. Each image was like a dagger, each smile a reminder of how deeply she'd betrayed me. And the messages kept going, revealing even more. I could see how she'd gradually, almost invisibly, distanced herself from me, making excuses to build a separate life with Nick. She confided in him, told him things she hadn't told me, secrets I hadn't known. It was clear this wasn't a fling. This was something deeper, an emotional connection built on a level of trust and intimacy that she had shut me out of. Then I found the final piece, a message she'd written but never sent, a draft that exposed the truth I'd been avoiding. She wrote about feeling trapped, wondering if she'd made the right choice in marrying me, questioning if she should have stayed with Nick. She admitted she didn't know if she could let him go, even if it meant hurting me. I closed the laptop, her words weighing on me. I had known her betrayal ran deep, but seeing her thoughts laid out so honestly, written in her own words, made it all too real. The woman I thought I'd loved, the woman I believed had loved me, was gone. In her place was someone I no longer recognized, someone who had been lying to me for months, maybe even years. The next morning, I couldn't look at her. She moved around the kitchen, humming to herself like nothing had changed, as if our life together hadn't collapsed in a single night. A surge of anger rose within me, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to wait. When she left for work, I called Jack and told him everything I'd uncovered. He listened in silence, his voice calm and steady when he spoke. "You need to confront her, Mike," he said finally. "She's gone too far. You deserve the truth, no matter how much it hurts." I knew he was right. The lies, the deception, it was too much. I couldn't keep pretending with a woman who had betrayed me so completely. That night, when she walked through the door, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I watched her move around the room, my gaze steady, my resolve unshakable. She paused, sensing the tension, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of guilt. "Sarah," I said, my voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She froze, her hand halfway to setting down her purse, and I watched the color drain from her face. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that fills a room and makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. "Mike," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sit down," I said, keeping my voice controlled but steady. "I wasn't here to play games. We need to have an honest conversation, Sarah." For a moment, Sarah glanced toward the door, like she was mapping an escape route, but eventually, she moved to the chair across from me, her eyes lowering to the floor. She seemed smaller somehow, guilt written all over her face. "Where were you today?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "At work," she answered automatically, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, fighting to keep my anger beneath the surface. "Stop lying, Sarah. I know you weren't at work. I followed you yesterday. I saw you with him." Her eyes went wide, and for a split second, I thought I saw relief, like she was almost glad the truth was out. But her gaze dropped again, her hands twisting in her lap. "Mike, I'm sorry," she murmured. "I never meant for it to get this far." "Then why did it?" I demanded, my voice rising with the frustration boiling over. "Why do you feel the need to sneak around, lie to me about everything?" She took a deep breath, looking up, and I saw the tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't know," she said. "I don't have an answer that'll make this better. It started as just talking. I felt lonely, like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. So, when I ran into Nick again, it was easy. He was familiar. He knew me from before everything." The words stung, each one a reminder of how long she'd been pulling away. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I demanded. "How you've destroyed the trust we built over all these years?" "I do," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I wish I could take it back." "But," I interrupted, barely able to contain the anger that was starting to spill over. "You chose him, Sarah. Every time you texted him, every time you met him, you made a choice. And it wasn't me." Her shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands, her sobs racking her body. A part of me wanted to reach out, comfort her, but the pain was still raw, the betrayal too fresh. "I'm sorry, Mike," she whispered, her words muffled but heavy with a sincerity I hadn't heard in months. "I never wanted it to end like this." I took a deep breath, memories of everything we'd shared, everything we'd built together, flooding my mind. But as I looked at her, I knew there was no going back, no way to fix what was shattered. "What are we supposed to do now?" I asked, my voice softer, the anger giving way to exhaustion. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, and for the first time, I saw the weight of her regret. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to try. If you'll let me." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Try? After all of this? How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" She reached out, her hand hovering over mine, her eyes pleading. "Please, Mike. I know I made mistakes, terrible ones, but I still love you. I just lost my way." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Part of me felt my resolve falter, memories of the woman I'd loved blurring my judgment. But I forced myself to remember everything I'd uncovered, the lies, the betrayal. "I need time," I said finally, pulling my hand back. "Time to figure out if I can even look at you without seeing what you've done." She nodded, choking back her sobs, and stood up, glancing back at me one last time before walking toward the door. As the sound of her footsteps faded, an overwhelming emptiness settled over me. I had found the truth, but it didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. The days that followed were filled with a strange, stifling silence. Sarah stayed with a friend, giving me the space I'd asked for, but her absence felt like a void. I went through the motions, going to work, spending time with friends, but it was all hollow, like part of me had been stripped away. Jack checked in regularly, offering his support, suggesting counseling, therapy, anything to help me work through the pain. At first, I brushed off the idea, too numb to even consider it. But after a week of sleepless nights and endless questions, I realized I couldn't get through this on my own. I started therapy, hesitant but desperate for some direction. The sessions were hard, forcing me to confront the depth of my hurt, unravel the complex layers of trust, love, and betrayal. But slowly I felt a shift, a gradual release from the anger and resentment that had taken hold of me. Then one evening, about a month after our confrontation, Sarah reached out, asking if we could meet. Reluctantly, I agreed, my emotions a tangled mix of apprehension and curiosity. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral place that didn't hold memories of us. She looked different, more reserved, her gaze downcast, as if the weight of her choices had finally settled in. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to tell you. I'm leaving the city." Her words caught me off guard. "Leaving?" She nodded, a sad smile crossing her face. "There's nothing left for me here," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I thought I could fix things, that somehow we could rebuild. But I realize now it wouldn't be fair to you. I've already hurt you too much." For the first time, I saw a depth of regret in her eyes, a genuine sorrow. She wasn't the same woman who had deceived me, who had lied. This was someone who had faced her own failings, who understood the weight of the damage she'd caused. "I want you to know," she continued, "I'll always regret what I did, to you, to us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure settle over me. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I hope you find what you're looking for too." We parted with a quiet understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of the life we'd shared and the one we were leaving behind. Watching her walk away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a final release of the pain and anger I'd held onto for so long. That night, as I walked back home, I felt different, lighter, stronger. The memories were still there, but they no longer held power over me. I had faced the truth, confronted the pain, and come out on the other side. For the first time in months, I felt a real sense of freedom, a quiet resilience rising within me. As I stood at my window, gazing out at the night sky, a small spark of hope flickered, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a way forward. In that moment, I knew I was finally ready to start over, ready to build a new life on my own terms.